Hey, what up? Welcome back to another video on one of the YouTube channels ever, and I just want to inform everyone that my social security number is now public information, and yours is too. If you also think that you're safe because you don't live in the US, I wouldn't really be too quick to think that, because if you live in Canada or the UK, you're also included in this. And with something that affects that many people, what's really the most surprising part about it is you aren't really hearing much about it for how big of a deal it is. And getting into it, today we're going to be talking about what might just be the biggest data breach ever, and starting us off, we're going to be taking a look at this article. Security experts are warning that a background check site may have been breached, resulting in the potential exposure of billions of social security and address records that could cover everyone in the United States. As Bleeping Computer reports, a hacking forum lit up when a user claimed to have access to a huge cache of documents gleaned from data brokerage National Public Data. Though it doesn't share its methodology on its website, NPD is believed to scrape its data from publicly available records to create individual user profiles generally used by private investigators or in background or criminal record checks. The hack reportedly doesn't just affect people in the US. The 2.9 billion files are also said to contain personal information for people in the United Kingdom and Canada as well. When the alleged NPD hack was first posted to these forums back in April, the person selling the cache for a cool 3.5 million claimed it contained information on every person in all three countries. After that initial sale post earlier this year, others later posted portions of the cache for free on the hacker forum, greatly accelerating their dissemination online. Alright, now after reading that, there's a lot to talk about here, starting with that 2.7 billion number. Now I know that definitely is a huge number, but what really isn't talked about here is how that number does include dead people as well. Because if you didn't already know, once you die, you still keep your social security number. And not only does it include dead people, but it also most likely includes either heirs and or duplicate information. But even when accounting for the dead people and all the different heirs, since the number is so big, it still probably includes everyone that is still alive. And speaking of everyone, like you just saw in the article, this breach doesn't just affect people in the US either, it also includes basically everyone in the UK and Canada as well, which of course also plays a huge part in that number being so big. But with that being said, your biggest question now is probably going to be, how does something like this even happen, and what can you do to make sure that you're safe and protected? And at least for the second question, no one really knows, because this is really the first time that a data breach this significant has happened, and it's not like we haven't had huge data breaches before. I think it was just a few years ago that Google had a huge breach, so we definitely know how to handle them. It's just that what makes this situation so much different is the same solutions that we use on a typical breach doesn't really apply here. And speaking of Google, they're actually a great example. So a while ago, I'm not too sure how long ago it was, but whenever Google had their massive data breach, they ended up having a ton of user info leaked, most importantly being users' login info. And their solution to that was just check your account for any suspicious activity and then just change your password. And obviously, if someone has your login info and then you change your password, that pretty much immediately resolves it. But that of course doesn't really work in this situation, because you can't really just up and change your social security number. And I know that there technically are ways to change your social security number, and you can do it, but those are very specific cases that you have to already prove that some sort of identity fraud or identity theft is going on, and then you have to go through a long process that typically requires you to go in person as well, which normally wouldn't really be that big of a problem. But in a situation like this where you have millions of people with their social security information just out there to the public, the system isn't really meant to support that many people attempting to change theirs at the same time. And moving to the next question of how something like this even happens, like you also seen from the article, unlike most people are probably thinking, the leak didn't even come from an actual government-owned service. It was a third-party background checking site that pretty much had everyone's information, because they use services like the National Public Data Brokerage to gather different people's information to use it for things like background checks. Which, after hearing that, definitely makes much more sense, because it's not not like the government is unhackable or anything, but it seemed a bit unlikely for them to have a breach this significant. But with everyone's information out there now, I know it probably doesn't need to be said, but this is such a bad thing because once someone has your social security number, they can pretty much do anything in your name. And that typically includes things like trying to find someone with good credit so they can either take out loans in their name, get a credit card in their name, or just do general scamming in their name. And it's not like these are necessarily new things either. People have been doing things like this since Social Security existed. It's just that with everyone's information out there for pretty much free, you're definitely gonna see a lot more of it with really nothing you can do about it. And even though you can't really do anything about it, there is one way where you can slightly decrease your risk of being targeted, and that's to pretty much be your average American and be broke with bad or no credit. Because like I just said, when people are looking to use someone's social security number for bad, they're typically looking for people with good credit so they can actually do something with it. They don't necessarily want to steal the identity of someone that already has $70,000 worth of student loan debts and a 274 credit score. So even with this breach, most Americans will probably be fine anyway because most of them don't really have much going for them. But even with that, it still doesn't take away from how big of a deal this is, especially since everything is out there for free. And this whole situation really just goes to show how accessible and honestly unsafe your data is. Because most people thought that something like your social security number is super protected and safe, and the only people that'll ever have access to it is you and the government. But with everything being converted to online, that also really just makes everything much more susceptible to being taken. And even with all the efforts that these different companies are making to put more protections in place of their data, all these different hackers have really showed time after time that they'll just adapt and find a way to get what they want. But this article does continue here, so we're going to be taking a look at the rest of that. Along with containing tons and tons of records that link names to social security numbers and addresses, the unencrypted cache is also said to attribute potential aliases of individuals as well. While Bleeping Computer was not able to confirm whether the breach truly did impact every person in the US, the UK, and Canada, its reporters did verify with some people whose names, social security numbers, and addresses were contained within it that they were correct. However, their current place of residence was out of date. Others they spoke to, however, said that their social security numbers were linked to people who were not them. As Bleeping Computer notes, it's important to know that each record is associated with every address a person has lived at. If you've moved around a lot, that means your corresponding record from this breach could have multiple address records connected to your name. A background check company called Jericho Pictures that's believed to conduct business under the National Public Data moniker has been hit with a class action lawsuit over its alleged failure to protect all that data. The company itself, meanwhile, has seemingly not responded to any request for comment, though as the Los Angeles Times reports, it has been telling users that it has purged its entire database and is investigating the third-party claims about the breach. Now, I'm not going to say that this 100% confirms that the worst-case scenario has happened, but judging by the company and the people's response, it looks like that probably is true, which would of course mean that everyone's social security number has been leaked and is free to be used by basically anyone. And since it does look like that is the case, and if worst comes to worst, I've seen a ton of people suggesting that the only real solution from here is either to just completely end social security and find some sort of new system, or have some sort of like major reset where basically everyone gets a new social security number. But no matter which route they do decide to go, whether that's keep it how it is, reset everyone's number, or come up with a completely new system, like I said earlier, with them making everything online, there's really nothing they can do to prevent something like this from happening again, whether that's with a new system or with the one that they're currently using. So honestly, at this point, I don't think anyone really knows the next steps that are gonna have to be taken, even the government, so we're really all just waiting around to see what's gonna happen next. And with that said, that's pretty much been it on today's video talking about everyone's information being stolen, and if you made it this far in the video, you probably liked something, so you may as well drop a like and maybe even subscribe. We're trying to get to a 1,000 subs before the end of the year, so every sub counts, but I'm not gonna hold y'all for too long, so I'll catch you guys in the next one.